The Mind's Eye with BJ Turnoff. It's available on iTunes, Pandora, Amazon, and all major platforms. Appreciate you listening. Appreciate you subscribing. Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the Mind's Eye. You're now standing at the intersection of history and mystery, the center of science and the strange, and your source for the subliminal to the criminal. I'm BJ Turnoff, host of this auditorium of audacity. Got a pretty tight, jam-packed show. On this one, we're going to be talking about two of the bigger topics that we often shine a light on, but with one great guest, UFOs and lost civilizations, but this time with a bit of a global perspective. For those who have been with the Mind's Eye since 2014 when we started, you know that our second episode was completely dedicated to UFOs, or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, which they're now known as, and even our first episode touched on it. So, I mean, you know that we've been talking about this since the early days, UFOs, the government conspiracies involved in them, and aliens, really, since the first few years. But you probably have also noticed that in the last few, we have strayed away from it. And it's not because I think it's like, you know, a ridiculous conspiracy theory, but really just, I think we just kind of talked the topic to death there for a while, and there's not much we could have added to the subject. And the question, what it comes down to, is whether UFOs, UAPs are aliens or, most likely, advanced spycraft from ours and other countries. And don't take me wrong, because I say that I do think aliens exist, mathematically speaking. If space is truly infinite, then how can they not? It's a hard probability. But a funny thing happened when we slowed down the UFO talk on this program, and then it just kind of exploded into the mainstream, and we're really happy to see that, of course, because now even major media outlets like New York Times has been the newsbreaker on all things UFOs, or, I mean, I guess you can also look at them like the propaganda arm, depending on your perspective. But what matters most is that the UFOs and the U.S. government are taking it very serious. They themselves have released their UFO videos, and now there's even a major U.S. congressional inquiry. Lots of UFO news happening on this side, but what we don't really hear about a lot is what's going on in the other side of the world about UFOs in the ufology community, particularly China. Although our once tightened lips are opening up now, what's it like over in Asia? To help us address that question, we have Shao Ma, Chinese ufologist. She joins us. She's going to share some insights into how China's ufology community survives under the country's tightened political control. Shao will also tell us about China's most famous UFO cases and describe her own supposed contact experiences with non-human intelligence, as she frames it. And like I said before, that's just the first part of the conversation, because she's also going to point out some interesting observation about China's most recent discovery that has rocked the archaeological world. Xiao's going to reveal some interesting information about the mysterious origins of the once-lost civilization Sanxingdui. Who are they? How did a seemingly advanced civilization flourish in isolation, create such amazing pieces of art and bronzeware? And why are there so many peculiar connections to ancient Sumerians and the stars? Xiao's going to answer some of these questions now, but you really do have to see the artwork for yourself that they produced. It's so intricate that only certain recent technology can even duplicate it. So Xiao's going to be giving a full presentation at Contact in the Desert next week, the Woodstock of UFO conferences, and that is how Xiao and I got linked up. She is the second of 3 Contact in the Desert interviews that I'm doing. And tickets are still available because it is virtual this year. I love how Contact in the Desert, essentially they're making lemonade from lemons from everything that's happening around us. So this is the first and most likely the only virtual Contact in the Desert ever. So it is pretty special. It's bigger and better than ever. They've stuffed the lineup. So if you want to get tickets and more information about Shao or our other Contact in the Desert guest, just go to our website, themindsEyemedia.com, and when you do get there, you're going to notice that themindsEyemedia.com, it's a one-stop shop for great content, a smorgasbord, just like the show here. We got blogs on pop culture and history, archives over 120 free episodes. That's right, absolutely free episodes. Just go there. We got links for our Facebook and Twitter pages, or just some fun and interesting news articles that I want you to get your hands on. If you love the content that we give you to listen, to watch, to read, you appreciate all the hard work and costs that it does go in to get it out to you, please hit the donate button at the top of the page. And you scratch my back, I'm definitely going to scratch yours. Everyone who donates gets minimally a free, never heard before, unaired show. And the more you give, the more you're going to get in return, just like free books, for example. Again, please hit the donate button at the top, themindseyemedia.com. Shao Ma, Chinese ufologist and researcher in consciousness studies, joins the Mind's Eye now. Welcome to the program, Shao.
Thank you for having me, Brian. Thanks.
I appreciate it. I'm really excited for this conversation because really on this show, for the most part, we focus on American UFO cases because, as we just spoke a few minutes ago, that's where we're based, right? So I can't wait to hear a little bit more about the global perspective on UFOs from you. But first, Shao, let's just kind of focus on you for a second. Tell listeners a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a Chinese. And then I went to Australia since I was 17 years old, settled down and study and work now based in Sydney, Australia. And my awakening journey started back in 2012. So first I was, saw a craft in the sky from my office window. And that really challenged my belief system and start to think, whether we're the only species in this universe. That's basically my initiation was through UFO kind of witness. And after that, and I had very intensive other content modality experiences, like out-of-body experience, witnessing, ETs, extraterrestrials, not in the physical form, but more in the spiritual sort of form. And lucid dreaming, all sorts. So things started picking up since 2012. That would be a short introduction, basically. So I'm Chinese, based in Sydney, Australia at this stage.
Okay, so we'll unpack all of that throughout the rest of the show. I know you're part of the International Chinese UFO Association. Share more a little bit about that organization.
There's a lot of politics in Chinese ufology. And, my experience, to be honest, wasn't very positive because I joined as a member and just received those kind of critics and sabotage. People try to ruin your show, conference, just because they're jealous about what you're doing. There are quite a few very nice people in the association, but to be honest, like what I can see is a lot of politics, especially the mixture of age is roughly around about 50 years old. So they have the mindset that they kind of want a new fresh blood to join, but also they don't want to lose the respect. So when they start to see the younger generation start to picking up, taking off, and they start to get a fear and worry. So that's where the critics and, other improper behaviors start to happen. So that association has some very funny experiences, to be honest. So.
Well, I used to be a paranormal investigator for I guess, and our focus was ghost and looking into that aspect of it, and it doesn't sound too unfamiliar or dislike from that community at all here, at least. So some things I guess aren't different, but speaking of, I guess, Chinese ufology. What's it like? We just talked about the community, but what's it like being a ufologist in China overall? How did the government respond, government-wise, and then, with the people?
Well, it's actually quite challenging to be let's call it UFO researchers, for example, or even ET experiencer, because in China, it's a communist country, and everything you do basically is based on political sort of narrative and directions, even for ufology, because like this field is, from my perspective, one of the most important fields at this stage because we know a lot what's truly going on behind the scenes. So that's why it attracts a lot of CCP's attention. They want to know what you have, not just about the experience from the Chinese ufology community, like the information ufology, like a UFO researchers got, but also do they have the technologies? So giving all those, political monitoring sort of control in China at this stage, not just for our field, but for other industries as well. It's just people are very concerned about their privacy and safety because we are not as open as the USA in terms of, we can get on the show, talk about this, what you have experienced, what I have experienced. It's very controlled. So we have to be extremely articulate the language properly when we get on the show, share some information. So by the time we have an interview in China, for example, like the one we're having, you sort of like thinning down all the content rather than just let it out, say anything you want to say. It's not the case in China. So in China, UFO researchers are firstly very concerned about their, safety and the privacy issue. The second is they always have that extra, sort of mindset about what they can say, what they can't say. They don't want to get in trouble. And and whether or not anything they might say may trigger any no political sort of, scrutiny or not. So in China, the environment is not so open at this stage compared with other countries.
Have you ever been contacted by a Chinese government agent?
I don't think so. I don't think so, but I wouldn't be surprised that there might be one or two mixed in the, in my interview shows in China or in my conference I had back in 2018, because they always sit down, watch, listen, kind of like check you out. I haven't been approached, to be honest, which I'm really grateful. Just leave me alone. But it's just, China is very different. So anything we need to do is have to be very cautious and, be careful. But I've been told once by someone to be told off, not like in person, be mindful, you do like, they kind of give me sort of message to back off, not to say too much.
You gotta tread lightly, I would imagine.
I don't know that person's sort of identity. They haven't really revealed to me, but just judging by the context, like how they deliver the message, I feel like it's a warning in some way. So as you can see in China, ufology is very much controlled by the political sort of agendas and other views. So
so there is a separation between the government and the people. Obviously, we kind of know what the government's all about, and you explain how they're going to react and with ufology and the community there. What about the Chinese people? I mean, how do they react to UFOs, ghosts? I mean, what's their perspective?
Yeah. So in Chinese ufology, what I actually learned is not just age group, because when I share my interview, did my interviews in Chinese platforms, I received a lot of feedbacks. And what's interesting about China side is people sent me all those emails, like hundreds of emails. When I open up, and the people like prefer, I think it's to do with personality traits. They prefer to talk about their own life experience privately, like, private email, or like, we've got WeChat, which is very similar to WhatsApp. So they have those like a private chat with you, Brian, this is what happened to me, this is what happened to you. So, but when I say, oh, that's brilliant, you have amazing contact experience. Oh, those are the information you've got from the beings. Why don't you join this, join our show, talk about it, share with us, share with all other Chinese listeners. And they will just, either you don't hear anything back from them, or they will just, thank you, I'd rather just be private, I'm happy to share with you privately. So I think, Brian, even though the contact modalities, experiences would be very similar between Chinese and ordinary Chinese with ordinary Americans and other peoples, but the reactions towards their context could be very different based on the culture difference, the social conditions, and even the personality traits. Because the Chinese and Japanese are very introvert, very reserved. So when something happened to them, they are not like, oh my God, I have to share with you, Brian. Let's catch up on YouTube. Let's just video record it and share with other viewers. That's what I normally see from Australians and Americans. Oh, let's talk about it. How are we going to resolve that issue? Oh, that's what happened. Okay. But in China, when something happened to Chinese, like contact experience, they are very reserved. They don't come out. They just, rather than, oh, I heard, Brian, this happened to you. Can we have a private call? Can we have a private email exchange? It's very private. And that's what I learned. Like in China community, it's a very reserved, private. That could be due to, I don't know, like what you think, could be, political control. People doesn't want to come out because of the risk might involved. Or could be because of culture conditioning. People doesn't like to be so different or be considered, for the lack of better words, like a weird or, black sheep in the family. So they prefer not to come out. And also the personality traits of the Chinese can be different compared with Westerners. So they are very reserved. Chinese people, especially, what's interesting is a lot of younger generations are starting to be awakened. So, because, I'm actually based in Sydney, Australia right now. If I go to those like monthly Ufology Association events, a lot of people I see would be quite elderly aged. But funny enough, in China, it's actually the other way around. A lot of younger generations between the age of high school age, I would say towards like 40 years old. So they would be attend those conferences and listen to those interviews. So I do see more younger generations start to be awakened, and the mass is huge. A lot of people are very conscious, Brian, about the fact that we are not alone in this universe. And there are so many photos or videos being captured about those UFO craft hovering in the sky in China right now. So yeah.
What's the most famous Chinese UFO case?
What's most famous one's called the Phoenix Mountain case. So what happened in that case? It happened, I think, 15 years ago at least. There was a Chinese farmer. He went to a mountain-like a place, and then he saw a UFO craft. So why that case became so famous among all other Chinese cases is because in that case, he had a physical, intimate sort of connection with a female alien. And he claimed that they had a hybrid child. So that case sort of like blasted in the news, like, oh my God, it's a Chinese farmer claimed to have, sort of physical contact with a female alien, and they claim to have a hybrid child. So that sort of kind of information attracts people's attention. That case, I would say, is the most famous case at this stage in China. But having said that, famous case doesn't really mean it's, from my perspective, is the most important case. From what I can see, Brian, the most important case is the Hanzo airport case.
Tell us a little bit more about that one.
This case is so famous because not just so many Chinese residents witnessed. You may heard about the news in the Western country that there's a UFO craft landed in that airport. Hanzo is actually a second-tier city in China, which is a pretty sizable city, right? They shut down the entire airport for the sake of allowing that UFO to land. What people doesn't know from those news is the news only say, oh, there's a UFO craft, hovering in the sky. But in fact, what I heard from two insiders is that the craft actually landed in the airport, and some way they had a treaty among the Chinese government and these alien race I think from Jupiter. I can't remember precisely. So that's actually quite interesting because it's not just merely a sighting or UFO landing, but whether or not they may have some kind of treaty amount, between them. That's really attracts my attention. So yeah.
Yeah, it kind of sounds similar to post Area 51 UFO legends in America. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Going back to that hybrid child one, is that hybrid? I'm assuming that hybrid child's back in space right now. There's no, we can't see it, right?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay.
And,
What a coincidence, huh?
Yeah, that Chinese farmer just, said, they told me in 20 years later we will have a hybrid child, and his dad is a Chinese farmer. And that really, I think, so touch on people's nerve. Like, what, you have a hybrid child, and that child is actually not pure blood of human species. I think that's how it attracts people's attention. Again, talking about physical intimacy with a female alien, that sort of things. So that is one of the, I would say, the most famous case in China right now in terms UFO and alien contacts. So, yes.
Yeah, well, I'd love to go a little bit more into the details of that one, but we don't have too much time, I imagine. So,
you can invite him, actually. I know his contact details. Maybe he can be your next guest on the show.
Yeah, I really want to probe deeply into that one, pun intended, obviously. So before, you talked about how you yourself have had some contact with I guess non-human intelligences. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes. So my contacts, from what I can remember, mainly happen in Australia. But what I've been told is this kind of contact experience happens since at birth. But I don't have any memory. I only had a memory, after 2000, post 2012, every now and then. So to be honest, my contact experience is a mixture of the positive ones, the neutral ones, and the negative ones. So I experienced all sorts. So those are the, could be extraterrestrials, could be angelic-like. Most of them, I would say more than 90% are very pleasant. And the 7% could be very neutral, business-like. Oh, we're just here to witness just watch what you are doing right now. So they do nothing, just want to observe humans' behavior and the daily, interaction with others. And there are 3% are quite negative. So I have experienced all sorts. And yeah, so I would say most of them are very positive.
So when again did the first contact happen?
That first contact happened back in 2012 when I was on I went to the office. Outside of the office window, I saw a silver ray color hovering UFO craft. Mm-hmm. And when I tried to take a shot, it just disappeared. And it was just so clear, Brian, there's no way people can climb that. It's a weather balloon. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I share with others, as and then people don't really believe me. My colleague, they say, you're probably too tired. It's not real, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not the only one. I'm sure there's a lot of viewers right now experience very similar thing, and they may have a more intense contact experiences than I do. So yeah, but I also got some messages, Brian. Like the messages I've got is very interesting. If you don't mind, I'm sharing. So
yeah,
the
please do.
Messages I've got from the benevolent beings, it's during different stage of my life evolution, basically my soul evolution. Beginning wasn't very, very positive. They were being very, for the lack of better words, like very critic. They say, the issue with you, Shao, is you have to overcome your shortcomings. And I was like, but I'm good, I'm this and that. They say, no, you have to complete your life transformation. So what they show me, because I was on the spacecraft, all sorts of different beings, and they show me the future Earth. The future Earth is glorious, just so beautiful. It's just like, I don't know, from the Bible, you call Garden of Eden, maybe. Heavenly-like place. It's a positive information, but they say, but not everyone can make the cut. So that's what they told me. So sounds like in the end of this cycle, we will have a great purge. So only certain population can make the cut. And I was a little arrogant. People was like, oh, I reckon I'll be fine. But they said, no, you are not. So judging by those information they show me, I wasn't during that time made a cut. But I thought I was just so conscious, I really into this. So they say, no, just because you sort of like in this circle, that doesn't mean you reach certain consciousness level. So you have to complete your life transformation. That means you have to change yourself, overcome your shortcomings in order to reach that level of consciousness, and then you can ascend. So after those a few years, I had a dark night of my soul. I really, changed myself, right? Changed my haircut, changed this and that. The issue with me during that time, I was a very stubborn little child. I was really stubborn. I don't want to change. I can eat the same lunch for 1 week. I love this. So that was my issue. That was my soul lesson. I wasn't really willing to change, and took a lot of time for me to overcome my shortcomings, to change myself in every aspect of my life. And eventually they show me, I don't know, the earthly may call it big data, whatever you want to call. They say just judging by this trajectory of your life, you are very likely to make the cut. So you are very likely basically to ascend. So that's the message I want to share with you and everyone listening to this interview. Just because we know the ETs, or just because we have those contacts, that doesn't guarantee we will ascend to the next, the future Earth. Only through life transformation, only through we push ourselves to the next stage, we can make the cut. So that's the message I want to share. That's what happened to me in the past.
Oh, that's beautiful. And congratulations on making the cut. I think I have a little bit of work to do before I can get there, quite frankly. And you just, you touched on a lot there. So I want to talk a little bit more about the beings themselves. But before, you just talked about the positive ones, what their message was, the neutral ones that you said. I think you mentioned that they were observing. What about the negative ones? What's their goal or message?
I just been really interfered a few years ago by those negative beings or energy. I wasn't know where they came from initially. And then I really learned it could be reptilian. I'm just constantly getting that message. They probably just want to mess around with us and just creating kind of like a roadblocks on our life journey and stir you up a little bit. Not very pleased with it, but they don't really harm me physically, but just creating those like nuisance, like intrusive thoughts. Sometimes you can do your work and have a very wonderful day, and all of a sudden you have those very negative thoughts pop up in your mind. And later I learned that's actually called intrusive thoughts, sort of like delivered by those negative beings. And we just need to watch out those interference. Yeah.
So that's one way that they contact you. What are the other ways that contact is made outside of thoughts that are I guess dropped into your head?
That's basically I can think about. Very sometimes they give you nightmare dreams, negative thoughts. They try to change your mindset sometimes if you want to do certain things. Like, I want to go for a marathon, I want to do this and that. They change your mind, like, you're not good enough, you shouldn't do this. Mainly speaking, my contacts, intrusive thoughts and nightmares. And that could be delivered, Brian. I suspect could be through some kind of like alien implants, maybe. But those are the two sort of types really upset me a bit.
So you're not like getting, captured by aliens and going to a UFO. And there's a visual and tangible aspect to it in the sense, physically, but it's mainly a mental contact.
Consciously at this stage, I only can say only the mind, sort of mess up with my mind and negative thoughts. And
so kind of the point I was getting at is, can you describe like what they look like, or there's no visual image of them?
I would say their green skin really looks really ugly, but and I always make a joke with my friends. Oh gosh, they got a communist red lipsticks and really big. Just really looks really ugly, green skin being, smooth being. I don't know, but looks like a reptilian. But I don't remember whether I'm on the craft or not. I just don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. That's what I can say at this stage. I just don't remember anything.
Yeah. Well,
maybe I had, maybe I didn't.
Well, maybe the one that you said was ugly, the reptilian one, maybe that's the actual attractive one of the species, and that's also the one that birthed our hybrid baby that we'll see in 20 years. So don't knock it till you try it, I guess. Do you continue to speak?
Here we go, Shao. You got the hyper charms. Like, oh my goodness, who knows? Let's hope not.
And do you continue to speak to them? When was like the last time that some, I guess, form of contact was made?
I don't speak to those negative beings. Every time they send me a negative message, I try to push them away. Just have to focus.
Well, what about the
on
positive ones? Like, I'm not just trying to restrict us to negative in any way. Like, contact when it comes to the positive ones, neutral ones, all of that. So,
yeah. Sometimes life can get a bit busy. I try to, I don't really focus on them that much, Monday to Friday, busy at work. But every now and then they do come, come to your room sometimes, have a bit of interaction with you. And sometimes they share all those very life daily sort of advice with me. Like, say, I have a plant in my apartment. They will say how to water your plant properly so that it can grow, those very daily life stuff. And can be, how you're going to improve yourself, how you're going to complete your life transformation, complete your soul mission on this planet, and this and that. They don't really come that often unless I really got into trouble, being messed around with those negative beings or any other things. They will intervene. But generally speaking, they quite hands off, leave you alone and just you go on with your own daily life. So, yeah.
And tell me again, when you were on the spaceship, I know that you don't remember, but when were you, when did you get that memory back, and how long were you on the spaceship for, if you remember?
They are also, they will allow me to remember some parts, every bits and drop information. Some more, some are less. Like they can tell me 10%, and when I ask something very sensitive, and the next one, the next one you will receive is a blackout. That's it. So that shows they don't want you let you know, or they just drop you back to your apartment and say, "Oh, all right, you will figure out your future in moving forward." So, I don't get everything all the time. It really depends on them. How much information they want to release to me at a conscious level. Otherwise, all other information, I call it as a data download, or compressed or suppressed, like into subconscious. They will activate certain consciousness if they want you to remember at a certain stage of your life. I do get those memory kickbacks every now and then.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how we actually got connected was through our contacts at Contact in the Desert, which is the biggest UFO conference in the United States and, in my opinion, the best in the world. So you're going to be doing a lecture at the virtual conference this year, and that's going to be next week. What are you going to be talking about?
I'm going to talk about archaeology. So the topic is, the name is called the Sanxingdui. I know it's very tricky to pronounce. To be translated, it's called the three-star piles, three-star mound. So there's three piles like an Egyptian pyramid. So why I want to talk about these is that civilization can be traced back 3,000 up to 5,000 years BC. And what the archaeologists have found is that those three-star piles people are lost civilization in China, ancient Chinese. And what's interesting about those civilizations is that they look more or less very Caucasian. And based on all the artifacts and all other information tend to suggest that they can be a breakaway civilization from the Sumerians or Egyptians. So even their culture and everything seems to point towards the Orion constellation, the way how they actually build their pyramids, piles. That's why they call three-star piles, because it's all pointing towards the Orion belt, those three stars. Tend to suggest it's a Sumerian culture, ancient, Caucasian-looking beings. So that really challenges people believe that when we say ancient traditional Chinese, does that always mean, Asian-looking Chinese like me? Maybe not the case. Ancient Chinese can have two different tribes. One is like Asian Mongolian Chinese looking. The other can be, when we're talking about ancient Chinese, can be Caucasian looking breakaway civilization from Sumeria, and they have a connection with Orion constellation, and their ancestors could be from stars. So we have to relearn our history a bit about China and the connection with the skies.
I mean, outside of the Orion constellation, because I mean that would have, stars is how they were, was used as directions, and those were the things that monuments were built to. I mean, what other connection connects ancient Sumeria and this lost civilization that was just refound?
Yes, because they talk about the third eye, Orion, and more or less they talk about Sirius. So for those information, I'll definitely share in the my presentation at Contact in the Desert.
Yeah. I mean, in preparation for the interview, I never heard of Sanxingdui before, but then I looked it up. I mean, it is really fascinating of such a sophisticated culture at that time. And what I was really blown or taken aback by was the art that they created. I saw some of the pieces. I mean, truly amazing stuff. And I'm hoping that and I'm wondering if you're going to share some of the artwork, like, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to share more about those artifacts and those amazing, like very advanced technologies they used back then. It's just such a lost civilization, highly advanced, and certain artifacts, even the modern days cannot really copy it anymore because we just lost, don't know how they actually created such technologies. And they use gold a lot, that civilization. But back then, ancient Chinese doesn't really use gold that much. That shows that there's a connection with Sumerian, the Egyptian cultures, and even their cultures and the clothes and everything they use, pointing towards Sumerian and the Egyptian cultures.
Yeah, the bronzeware was really amazing, and yeah, I think that I saw a gold staff that had engraved inscriptions on it that were so intricate that supposedly, lasers today is the only thing that can actually make that happen. And I just want to talk about one other piece that I thought was just truly remarkable, and I imagine you're going to be talking about this one because it seems so important. The Tree of Life artwork of this piece.
Oh my gosh, yes, you're right.
Why don't you give a little bit of a teaser about that? Describe it as a way so people kind of draw into the conference.
So Tree of Life is actually, traditionally speaking, not strictly speaking, to do with Asian Chinese culture, like traditional Chinese. But in this civilization called the Sanxingdui, what they have found is lots of artifacts related to Tree of Life. And those Tree of Life have, 3 different branches, and each branch has 3 birds. And the way how they designed the Tree of Life are literally almost the same as the pictures you can find from the Sumerian tablets. Tree of Life, they believe that there's a connection between human beings and their gods. In order to reach their gods, they have to climb on the Tree of Life. So sometimes I wonder whether Tree of Life is another expression of Kundalini awakening. So it seems like in order to connect with their higher self or gods in the sky, you have to be fully awakened, Kundalini awakening to do with Tree of Life, Kabbalah stuff. So yeah, a Tree of Life will definitely be shared in my presentation. So I do see a lot of artifacts, the way the design, the material they use, and all points towards the similarities with Tree of Life mentioned in the Sumerian cultures and even the Egyptian cultures. That's the part I'm going to talk about. Thank you so much, Brian, for raising that up.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, because I mean, it was just so interesting in the piece, the art. I mean, I think the story behind it a little bit was, if I recall correctly, it was actually broken into like a bunch of pieces and then had to be pieced together. And as they're piecing it together, they're astonished, and then when it's finally put together, it turns out to be the world's oldest and tallest bronze Tree of Life piece.
Yes.
So
yes,
it is just unbelievable, and like you said before, the Tree of Life was considered kind of a stairway to heaven of sorts. It's supposed to let you communicate with their I guess their gods. And so the Sanxingdui also used a lot of jade in their works, which was also thought to be able to help you communicate to the divine. So I mean, the next question would have to be, obviously, I mean, were they literally trying to communicate with something not of this earth?
Yeah, well, I believe so. And they talk about third eye a lot in that culture civilization. They believe that the god have the highest eye, and its ministers and nobles have the middle eyes in the middle, and the slave, they will blind the slave so that slave doesn't deserve to have eye. How they actually show us is like a pyramid. The eyes on top, the highest top, the middle servants have an eye in the middle. The lowest bottom doesn't deserve to have an eye. So that seems like Illuminati symbol to me, and I will share more about that part, whether or not the ancient civilization, if there's any connection with Illuminati. I don't want to get into purely conspiracy theory, but I do believe commonly they have some kind of knowledge about the third eye, and there seems like even in those $1 notes, you've got you can see a pyramid and there's eyes on top. That's actually quite interesting. It seems like they have the commonality, similarities in between the power of third eye. So for that information, I will share a bit more in my presentation as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try and catch that one, particularly because this year, with everything that's happening, I shall not name it by name, but Contact in the Desert is going to be virtual this year. I imagine this will probably be the last time that they do that, because next year they'll probably go back to the standard format of doing it live in Joshua Tree, California. And I know before you said that you never actually been to the States, so I think that's going to have to be your excuse to get here, right? Next year's Contact in the Desert.
I would love to. Yes, and not just for the presentation focus on archaeology like this one. And I can talk about more about, people probably doesn't know, in China, there are so many pyramids. I'm not sure if you heard about them or not. There's so many pyramids. Some pyramids are even bigger than the Giza pyramids. Those pyramids are unexplored. There are quite a few Chinese researchers really looking into those pyramids in China. And might be that's a connection between the ancient civilization, which we don't know yet, and who knows what they can find underneath. Maybe you could consider to invite them to your show and share a bit more with your audience about, the unknown pyramids in China. And for the Contact in the Desert, Brian, I'm more than happy to share not just archaeology, but also the insights into Chinese ufology and the spiritual communities, the parts we haven't really touched on. I'm more than happy to answer those questions as well.
I guess you'll have to connect me with a bunch of people, and it sounds like that gentleman, the architect with the
Absolutely.
pyramids, and then the hybrid farmer dude as well. So don't forget to hook me up with that guy. Before I let you go, because the clock is winding down here, just tell listeners and fans how they can reach out to you if they can, because you're a bit of a mystery woman on the internet here.
So I can be contacted, through my email address. My email address is shao.ma@hotmail.com. And people can find me through, Facebook, and just search me, Shao Ma, and they will find me and connect with me. So I'm very easy to be located. Thanks.
All right. So you're not too much of a mysterious woman. You're just not huge on social media, sounds like. Well, truly, very, really fascinating stuff, Shao. Like I said before, I'm definitely going to try and make that virtual lecture of yours. So if you see me, wave to me. I guess I don't know if it's going to be on Zoom or not, but definitely wave to me. And just really thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you so much. Thanks, Brian.
Make sure you stick around for next week, because we got our final Contact in the Desert episode, and also our last one before we take our annual summer break. Dr. Michael P. Masters, professor of biological anthropology, he joins us. He's going to examine the premise that UFOs and aliens are actually just human descendants from the future returning to study their/ours evolutionary past. Pretty interesting take on it. So make sure you come back in just a few short days. Until then, be well and let well be. I'm BJ Turnoff, signing off for The Mind's Eye.